Welcome to American Diplomat, our stories heard only here. I'm Pete Romero, and all the way across town in Easton, Maryland is my compañera,
Laura Bennett. We're here via Zoom, which means you can, we'll post this as a regular podcast, but we'll also post the video on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TV, and we might even do Twitter. But
who are we talking to today, Laura?
Lainie McKeating. And she's really interesting because Lainie contacted us on Facebook, and we love that anytime anybody does. And we had this chat, and she suggested shows that relate to the family experience of the Foreign Service, because a lot of spouses and children are essentially serving along with a Foreign Service officer to whom they are married and who is in their family. And Lainie and her husband joined together, and he is a Foreign Service officer in consular. Is that right, Lainie?
That's right. That's right.
And Lainie is a Community Liaison Officer, and they travel the world together working for the Foreign Service.
But our story is with Lainie is a little bit different. I don't think there's any kind of preparation that she could have had to be the CLO, the CLO, the Community Liaison Officer at her first tour that could have possibly prepared her for what comes next.
American Diplomat is a project of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation in partnership with the American Academy of Diplomacy. We're talking. So
welcome,
hi,
Lainie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for reaching out to us in the first place. So tell us a little bit about your background. Like, how is it that you and your husband, who I understand joined together, how is it that you came to be doing that? You didn't jump out of, Foreign Service school and join. Your path was different.
Our path was different. So we were in Texas. The Foreign Service is actually our third career, so to speak, or his third career. He's an attorney. He was practicing law when my family came along and said, we want you to go to Laredo, Texas, to open an insurance agency alongside them. So we decided to do that. So we went from the Austin area all the way down south to Laredo, Texas, to open a business. And we were there for 9 years. We built a great book of business. We did a lot of community work, a lot of civil work. But one of the things that we discovered about ourselves was that we really liked it, and we had this affection for living in a different culture than what we had. I don't know if affection is the right word. We had this chill and a desire to know more. I think we're really curious people, so that was helpful. Then we went to Ethiopia and adopted our little boy, and while we were there, we discovered we were there for an extended stay, and so while we were there, we discovered American parents. We were really strange. We really wanted to stay with Ethiopian families while we were there. We tried to learn as much of the language as we could. We ate the local food. We shopped at the local markets, and we were really chill about the governmental process of adoption, where a lot of the other parents were trying to contain it and control it. We had a lot more flexibility just built in, and we thought there's something kind of different about us. I mean, these foreign cultural type of experiences sort of suit us. And we came back home and knew right away that insurance wasn't going to be the rest of our life. We had to find something that matched. And we looked at a lot of different types of options, but he said, I remember when I was in college, some Foreign Service people, the State Department people came and took some of us out of some classes and talked to us and gave us an introduction to the State Department and for the Foreign Service and tried to get us to take the test. And he goes, I've always wanted to go back and try that.
Huh.
And I said, why not? So he literally on Amazon got a book, started studying. He met with one of the ambassador in residence, is that the right term? At the University of Texas, and just sort of had a preliminary discussion about, what does it take to get in? We kind of sidelined it because we'd gotten to a real busy time insurance-wise, and we're running the business. I'm selling, and he's writing the policies, right? So that was our role. We were a good team that way. And he said one day, he goes, Lainie, you know that test I was going to take? I think it's tomorrow. I had to send it. You think I should take it? And I'm like, why not? Let's just see what happens. He passed. And so for each one of the next preliminary parts of the process, the way through, everything he just passed. He just kept passing. He just kept passing. And when we finally decided to do it, we were like, yes, we're going to say yes to this. He passed his oral assessments. He was one of two out of a room full of people.
Wow.
And he called me and said, I've passed. And I said, I have no doubt. I have no
Well,
doubt.
that's really impressive, though, because most people take it more than once, and many take it lots of times and never pass. So first time, finds out about it, no studying, just walks in blind. I mean, whoa.
Well, I married up on the intellectual scale. He's special that way. I'm smart that way. He's special that way. So yeah, no, I mean, from there, everything went very fast. It was like May and July. We had to sell our house, sold our house in 10 days. He showed up to A100 like the second week of June or July or something. I can't remember how it all went, but that was 7 years ago. Once we got in, it was like we had found our people. I don't know how else to describe it. We finally felt like we were understood, and we understood the group we were in. People with a passion for the work we do. It just fit. It just fit. I've never seen anything that fit his personality and my personality quite the way Foreign Service life has fit.
So this was how many years ago that you joined?
It's 2012.
All right.
So 8 years. Oh my goodness. 8 years.
So what happens? You go and I know A100 is your orientation class, and
Yes.
you go in, and there's other classmates, and every's a Twitter at where they might go for their first tour, and
oh gosh, yes.
And you guys get your assignment in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Yes.
How'd you wrangle that?
Oh man, it was such an interesting thing. The first list that he had for a consular first tour was like, I can't remember, Pete. It probably had over 100 different destinations on there. And so I didn't know how that whole process worked. I was telling Laura earlier that we've got some kids with some learning things. I have a son with a heart issue. So we have some different things in our family. So whenever you're going through that process, from you get your list, an A100 class, to paring it down to what countries you're eligible to work in and to live in and function in, there's a lot of little parts to that process to make that a success for you and for the State Department, right?
Well, that's true, but I was a single guy at the time, so it was a lot less complicated for me because I knew that I had to work in what was then known, and probably still, as a visa factory. In other words, all you did all day was basically interview dozens, if not hundreds, of people for non-immigrant visas, tourist visas, or immigrant visas, whatever it might be. And since that was the work that I knew I would have to do as a first tour officer, I decided, best place to do it would be somewhere near the beach, because the alternatives were in the desert of Mexico. So my whole thing was a lot simpler.
So where did you end up going first?
The Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, and it was great because
first post though. But
oh yes, yeah, no, it was great. Not only did we have the beach, but they had an attempted coup by the president, and there was a toque de queda, they called it, where everybody had to stay indoors, kind of quarantined for political reasons.
Yeah.
Driving around with government license plates and people thinking you were the enemy because of it. I mean, it was a terrible kind of time. I had to carry a gun, but it was exciting as hell.
Wow. Wow. Well, yeah, it's actually a benefit. You didn't have a family tagging along with you at that point.
So tell me, how did you get roped into being the community liaison officer in Jakarta? And tell me how that all started.
Sure. So whenever I was when Sean first got into A100, I decided, or maybe I had some coaching from someone, but I took every single eligible class available at the Foreign Service Institute for spouses. And I mean, I did everything I could find just because I was in a new culture and I was in a new line of work and I was in a whole new thing. And I didn't know what life was going to hold for me. And I am a person with goals and I am a person with a desire for a career. So I was a little thrown off, took all the classes that I could possibly take. And one of the ones I took was something about family member employment. And while I was hearing all the different types of jobs available for spouses, they described this community liaison thing. And I raised my hand and I said, that's my job. That's me. That is, you just described the perfect Lainie job. And they all laughed and they said, well, I'm probably not on your first post. That probably won't happen. And I said, okay, if it won't happen, that's okay. But eventually I'm going to be the clo. And so when I got there, I probably interviewed for about 7 different jobs. And
you mean when you got to Indonesia or what?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was really trying because in Indonesia, they don't have a work agreement for spouses outside of the embassy. So my options were inside the embassy. So a few jobs would come up and I would just try it. I mean, my background is marketing. I can write that job. I can write my experience to match any job description, probably anything outside of RSO, like pretty much everything else I can make it fit. And I kept trying for different jobs. And I finally went to HR and I said, look, see this face? I'm not going to go away. You need to help me find a job. And they said, well, have you ever done like an educational programming type of thing? And I said, yeah, I've trained lots of people for different things. And they said, well, okay. So they put me in a little position for HR. And while I was doing that, the clo position became open. And I was really reticent because I remember being told, you probably won't get it on your first try. And I had already kind of established a job in HR and didn't want to really mess up what I had there, right? So I did get told, Lainie, you would really be good at clo. Just go give it a try. There's not a lot of people who've applied. Go try. So I did, and whenever I'm going to put a plug in right now for the Global Employment Initiative people that are part of helping spouses find work. This is an extra additional program that's been put together by the State Department that is fantastic. So what they did was they took my past work experience and helped me put that into government language, right? So that whenever they were looking at my resume or looking at all my information, it matched what they were looking for. Does that make sense? So I might have said event planning in the past, what I was doing, and they might have a different term for that matches what it's called in the State Department. So anyway, I used that service, had a great experience, got to practice interviews, went into the interview. I was so nervous because you're interviewed for the position, you're interviewed by a panel. It's not a one-on-one. I was in like a U-shaped, there's tons of people sitting around these chairs and I'm in the hot seat answering questions from the whole group.
What kind of questions, Lainie?
There's, some of the typical questions are, let's say you have to implement a policy that you disagree with. How would you handle that? If you've been asked to do something that you don't feel that is fair or right for the situation, but you're going to follow policy, how would you handle that? Well,
you knew what the answer to that was. I mean,
follow the policy.
yeah. I mean,
Yes, follow the policy, because that was easy for me because that was true, because I don't know anything about all of this. I'm new to this whole environment. They asked me what changes I had planned on making to the family and employment thing. And I said, I'm just going to learn. I made no promises. I made no big statements. I answered really honestly and openly and confidently, and walked out of there not knowing if I got the job at all.
It sounds like it really was the right job for you. And so you didn't have to do anything but be candid and focused.
It's a huge job. And I don't think, whenever when you're in the embassy life, you're looking at the community liaison officer person and you're thinking, what a great fun job for party planning. What a fun job to do all the graphic design for the newsletter. It is so much more than that. I mean, we're reporting back to DC. We are handling and managing all the information. Like, I knew where everybody's kids went to school. This is a community of about, well over 500, I would say 400 direct hires, but the community, when you imagine kids and families, that's a lot of people. And so I had to know where everybody lived. I had to know everybody's cell phone numbers. I had to manage all that information. So there's just a lot to it. But I actually loved it. I loved that. I loved knowing everybody. I loved, I don't know, I loved having my hand in everything. Is that the right word? I loved being a busybody.
So, Lainie, you are the liaison between the embassy and the community, and you kind of give guidance to people about, where to get things, education, employment, all kinds of things. Yeah. Okay, and people come to you with lots of questions, and you're just there on new at post, and so you're trying to figure all of this out to answer questions appropriately. But then something falls into your lap, and I want to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I had been officially hired probably in March, and I didn't take the position and go to the office until May, like mid-May. During that time, we had a horrible situation happen at the international school in Jakarta. As parents, we all got these letters that said, there's been an event at the school. It appears that there's been a child molested, maybe more than one child has been molested. And we all panicked. And
so Lainie, just to get this straight, this is a school, the international school in Jakarta is a school that most embassy employees send their kids to.
Yes.
400 plus people.
Yes, and the school is huge and beautiful and amazing. And so I was a little bit, fearful and shocked when I started hearing this information. I was really upset because this was supposedly happening to an elementary age kid, and I had a young child at the school, and I was really upset by the whole story. And so when I took the position, I knew I was coming in with this out there. I didn't quite know how much it would affect the entirety of the situation. So as I was coming in, there was more and more information trickling in, and the story was getting bigger and harder to control.
This was how long after you arrived, and how long after you began as the community liaison officer?
So I arrived in July of 2013. This happened in probably April of 2014.
So a few months later.
A few months, but I was just going into the CLO office. Like, it was probably 3 weeks before I started.
You're like, welcome to my new job. Oh my gosh.
Really, I walked into the very first meeting I went to as CLO was a meeting where we were meeting with the I don't know, should I say this, the Office of Overseas Schools? We can take that out, right? If that's
no, that's good. The Office of Overseas Schools kind of handles in a kind of remote way from Washington.
Yes.
All of the schools that our kids go to, and they evaluate them and they follow up and make sure that they're of a quality that at least would be as good as a school you find in the United States, particularly as it relates to kids with special needs. So they're kind of overseeing this, but you're their person, kind of there on the ground.
Yes, and so I'm representing the community, right? And so I'm talking to this group of people whose job is to assess the accreditation and the special needs situations at these schools. I'm coming in as somebody who's going to take the information I'm learning and pass it back to all the family members and all the parents, not necessarily family members, but everybody that's a parent at the school will get a letter from CLO describing what's going on. And so was a little bit panicked that this was my first meeting, and it was a little bit hairy. There was some yelling and some very demonstrative people, and everybody. I just can't describe enough how inflamed the situation was. People were very upset. And one of the reasons why they picked Jakarta, a lot of people picked Jakarta because it had a very, very good reputation for education there. That particular school was one of the gems in Southeast Asia.
So
And
what was the accusation against, was it a teacher that abused children?
the original accusation was brought about by one child, and then it grew to 3 kids, and then it went back down to 1. But he accused 8 or 7 janitors of abusing him in a bathroom. That was literally like a bathroom next to the classroom.
He accused
And
7 or 8?
yes, like there was like 7 or 8 people arrested for that. And they said some of them were the abusers and some of them were recording it. The press jumped in and started making up extra to the story to inflame the story.
So wait a minute, Lainie, how old was this kid?
5 years old?
What?
Ah.
Yeah.
5 years old?
Yeah. And I mean, you know, as a parent, you hear this and it's heartbreaking, right? I mean, we all believed it.
It's horrifying.
Completely. The child gets believed without question. But
Right.
then there started to be some evidence that just didn't follow up. And one of the big things was the mom was trying to get the school to pay her to be quiet about it. And so
That's pretty fishy.
it was fishy. And so they said, well, you know what? We're going to bring in the police and do an investigation. You're accusing our school of this, so we're gonna look at it. And then
Now,
she
was the mom Indonesian or was she a foreigner?
the mom was Indonesian, married to a foreigner, and there's a lot of speculation as to who was kind of controlling her. There was a lot of gossip about some of the big landowners in Jakarta putting her up to doing this and to marring the name of the school and to causing a big lawsuit. And there was one very wealthy person in Jakarta who offered to pay all of her legal fees and to continue this whole story. So it got really hairy. But when I discovered that there was going to be the group of people who had been accused were not school employees, they were actually a contract group of janitors. And it was a local group of janitors who didn't have a lot of money. It wasn't deep pockets. It wasn't the big international school that they were going to try to go after. All of a sudden they changed their focus and started chasing different teachers. And so supposedly the little boy opened up a yearbook and started looking at some of the teachers and said, that one was one, and that one was one, that was one. And it all.
So what are you saying to all of these parents who are, jacked up in the ionosphere over this issue?
Gosh.
I mean, what are you saying?
Pete, it was hairy. So I felt a little, I was unsure how to handle it because one, I'm a parent and I'm getting all this information at the same time as the community. But then when I started kind of getting it more interior and started hearing more of the doubt, I started thinking, I'm a little stuck on how to relate this doubt without sounding like I'm defending child molesters. So I had to manage that information carefully, and I had a lot of help. I will say that my supervisors were very protective of me and helped me guard the information and explain the information and then be very clear about the information. But one of the things that, one of the best things that happened in the very beginning when it was getting a little out of control and people were saying, I'm leaving post. We had people that were going to curtail. We had people that were coming into town who planned to curtail and not come to Jakarta after all. So it was all falling in the clove. This is all falling into my purview, And so one day I'm having probably panic attack number 5 of the day in my office, and the RMOP comes by. He just happens to pop in.
So RMOP, regional.
regional medical psychiatrist,
Oh, okay.
psychologist,
Okay.
psychiatrist,
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
by and he says, how are you doing? And I said, crying, I'm not okay. I'm not okay at all. This is really horrible and I don't know how to handle it. And then he said, tell me what you know. What do you know to be true? And I said, oh, I know people are upset. And he goes, okay, what else do you know to be true? And I said, well, there's been a little boy that's been hurt. And he goes, do you know that that's true? And I said, no. And he said, what do you know, Lainie? What do you know is true? And so I said, I know that everybody at the embassy is working very hard to get answers. I know that we're working very closely with the school, and the school's working very closely with us. I know that because I'm in the middle of it. He goes, then that's what you tell people. It was great. I still very much appreciate that doctor for popping in and just being a voice of wisdom and helping me clear the air, because it was a little bit emotional at the moment.
Lainie, you talk about the janitors being accused and some of them actually involved or allegedly in the abuse.
Right.
I don't know what happened to them. There was one teacher the allegation tended to center on.
There were two. The two teachers, there were two male teachers, and one was, I think, involved with, one of them was an elementary school teacher, I believe. I can't remember exactly. And one of them was a theater teacher and was working on the opposite end of the campus. And the one that was the Canadian, that the family decided to really accuse this Canadian teacher. They tried to go after mostly foreign teachers. And
because they presumably had deeper pockets. Was that
right? They thought they thought there would be hush money involved and that kind of stuff.
But these were teachers who the little 5-year-old picked out of a yearbook?
Yeah, picked out of a yearbook.
Oh, man.
And the story that went along with it was just so bizarre. He said that the teacher, literally Pete, he said the teacher pulled a blue rock out of the sky that was magic. And that whenever he, supposedly did all these horrible things to this child, he took the blue rock and waved it over him and all the evidence went away.
What?
Yes.
The kid said that? The 5-year-old?
Yeah, yes, and the press bought it and the police bought it, and that was actually brought into evidence during the trial. The magical blue rock that couldn't be reproduced because it was magically pulled out of the sky. Another one was a blender where they supposedly made some magic potion to give to the child to forget all the bad things that had happened. And they literally confiscated the blender from the school teacher's lounge and had chemical testing to see what kind of drugs might have been in the blender. As time went on, the story became less and less credible. And all the parents started kind of going, what? This is really weird.
So they're alleging, this family is alleging that their 5-year-old first was molested by like 7 or 8 janitors, but then the janitors didn't turn out to, so then it was teachers. So this 5-year-old is supposed to have been molested by upwards of 10 people?
Yeah. There was like I said, an Indonesian teacher supposedly involved. They also had originally accused one of the vice principals at the school, which was an American woman. And they kind of set their sights on her, but our fantastic ambassador at the embassy at that time, he just absolutely wouldn't have it. And he went in and he said to them, if you want the full weight of the United States government to come down on you with both feet, say her name again. This will not happen.
So the ambassador was Bob Blake.
Yes.
And he basically didn't buy this story from the get-go, or at least concluded after time had passed, that this was really butkus.
About that time, once he started to see evidence, and he was invited into some of the upper level meetings and to hear some of these events, and he would accompany the principals of the school to the police department, and he was there. He was super hands-on. He would come back and he would hold town meetings. And so every parent could ask questions. I could ask, and I would be taking notes and sending it to the people who were yet to arrive and that kind of thing. So once the evidence started to not match at all the story, was it was becoming very clear that this was all made up and it was meant to detract.
Well, wait a minute, Lainie. I think we might have, who's on the line?
Yeah, it's Bob Blake. I've just joined.
Oh, Bob, welcome. We're just about where Lainie is talking about how the story just doesn't seem to hang together, the allegations against janitors and teachers and all of that sort of thing.
And how you stood up
Right.
for the American who was being wrongly accused.
So, Bob, let me ask you why you're on the line here. It's Bob Blake, who's our ambassador there during the same time. What made you? Was there any one thing or set of things that made you conclude that these allegations just seem to be non-credible?
Well, there were a lot of things. First of all, the crime was alleged to have occurred in a room with clear windows on all four sides in the middle of the day when there were lots of people around. So there's just no way that something like that could have happened in such a public environment. So it just, to me, the whole thing didn't sound right. And, you know, there was always suspicions that the people who were making the allegations had concocted the story as a way of trying to get some settlement money out of the U.S. Embassy because they incorrectly thought that the U.S. Embassy was a for-profit, that they thought the school was for a profit institution, and that it was, again, American-based. In fact, it wasn't. It was an international school, and it certainly was not a for-profit institution. So they certainly didn't have the money to pay off something like this. And these kinds of things are actually quite common in Indonesia. People try to extort money in one way or another. So we decided that we wanted to stand up for our teachers, and it was certainly very important for the morale of the school and for the teachers, of course. And we didn't want to have to pay money because we just didn't think that was right.
Bob, was there ever a dollar figure put on what would constitute enough money for this family, for the mother, father of this kid to go away and just be quiet?
No, but I was told that it would be in the millions of dollars.
Oh.
And, you know, and in fact, even, I will say, kind Indonesians who had nothing to do with it, but who cared a lot about the school, offered to pay on the school's behalf. And and also I'm happy to say the school administration refused their kind offers and said, look, this is not right. We shouldn't be rewarding bad behavior.
So the people who offered to pay to protect the school from this, did they actually think that these bad deeds had happened, or were they just trying to make it go away, knowing full well that probably nothing ever had happened?
No, they were just trying to make it go away because they knew that it was going to be a long and messy ordeal, and they were not very confident in the Indonesian legal system to deliver a fair outcome. So they thought that the easiest thing to make this go away would just be to pay it off right away.
Huh.
So what's happening with the embassy community, Lainie, at this point in time? Are people starting to calm down a little bit after, you know, the evidence is such and the request for hush money and all of that comes to play? Are people calming down?
So among the family members, there was a little bit of camp. There were a couple of camps. One was they should just pay it. Other camps were there probably something happened to that kid and we're giving up too soon. And then the majority of everybody was really listening to what Ambassador Blake was saying, or what the information that the CLO office was putting out. They were taking it pretty good. I think they were taking it pretty good. There were people that were coming into town that were starting to get upset, and Ambassador Blake might be able to remember some of this part of it. As the summer wore through, like we were getting into July, it was a little chaotic. About August, the government of Indonesia decided that they were going to pull the accreditation for the elementary school or the early childhood program for the schools. So about the same time that people were starting to relax about the trauma and the child, we were starting to get much more upset because this was about to really impact them and their school and their kids. And we weren't even sure we were going to have a kindergarten for the kids to go to. And they were starting to pull some of the visas of the teachers. It got really hinky. Then they started making new laws about the school. It could no longer be an international school. They had to actually become a little bit more organized with some of the local laws and some of the religious views. Help me, Ambassador Blake. Do you remember some of this part?
I do. I don't remember the actual closure part, but I will say that people at the very high levels of the government whom we were talking to were generally speaking sympathetic and wanted a fair outcome. Probably had undue faith in the Indonesian legal system, and but I don't think that. Never at their level, at least, was there a serious effort to try to close the school down, because they understood what an important institution it was for not only a lot of the embassies, but also for the business community. Yeah, because a lot of the business community had their kids there. And so having a high quality school like that in Jakarta was a very important way to draw in talent and draw in foreign investment. And if the school went away, that would have been a real very detrimental to their efforts to attract foreign investment.
But Bob, at the same time, it sounds like not only do you have this winding its way through the court system, an unreliable court system at best in Indonesia, but you must have had an incredible amount of public discussion about it, articles in the newspapers, radio, TV. I mean, this must have been making it really complicated and difficult to kind of make the decisions that you needed to make to get this thing moving ahead in a just way.
There was, it kind of came and went. It wasn't on front pages all the time, but there was certainly a lot of attention because it was a very important and prominent institution in Jakarta. And of course, there was a lot of speculation about who was really behind this. There were people who were alleging that it was really a bunch of developers, and what they wanted to do was to put the school out of business and then take over the very valuable land that the school occupied and build, large apartment buildings. And there were, so there was a lot of speculation like that about who was really behind this, and there's often sort of conspiracy theories that thrive in these kinds of environments. So I must say the school management was very good about not succumbing to any of that kind of conspiracy theorizing, and just kind of sticking to the facts and proclaiming their innocence and proclaiming, their willingness to work with the Indonesian legal system and so forth. And, also pushing very hard for an evidence-based decision, because they and I felt that if all of the evidence came out, that any impartial jury would find that there was no basis to this claim.
Well, in the United States, if this would have happened, we have a more reliable judicial system and due process, obviously. It would have been heart-wrenching for family members and children in that kind of community. And yet now you take this overseas, you've got this in a multicultural, multinational milieu, in an unreliable judicial system where the press is intermittently weighing in, or the media is intermittently weighing in on this thing. What happened in the end?
Well, in the end, unfortunately, the case went all the way up to the highest levels of the court system. And just when we thought that we had won at the appeals level, when the appeals court threw out the decision and said there was no basis to it, the government to our consternation, decided to appeal that decision all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court overruled the appeals court and said, in fact, there was evidence, which was incorrect. And so that's when these poor guys actually did end up having to spend significant time in jail. And
so who ended up, the janitors, the teachers?
It was only last year that the Canadian was finally released after serving, a several-year sentence.
Oh my God! How many people ended up in jail?
Two.
Two teachers.
So
two
a
teachers?
Canadian and an Indonesian.
Both teachers?
So what? Yeah.
The janitors also spent some time locked up. I don't know if it was.
They did. That was a separate case. That was that they were involved in, and one of them, in fact, died in prison, which was an awful outcome as well.
Yeah.
This is horrible. This is a horrible story.
It's
Jeez.
truly awful.
Oh my
But
God.
that's why we felt that it was important to speak up. And even though the teacher was a Canadian citizen, the United States had an important stake in this because so many of our children were at that school. So I felt it was important to speak up. My Canadian colleague did not, and in fact, that was a source of consternation to the Canadian teacher that his own government refused to do anything. I will say that when Prime Minister Trudeau was elected, he reversed that decision and took a very public position saying that that the teacher should be released and that this was going to be a very important matter in their bilateral relations if this was not resolved in a satisfactory way.
But it had to go all the way up to the Prime Minister of Canada.
It did. But to his credit, he did the right thing. Was great.
Wow. So, Lainie and Bob, are there any lessons in all of this for anybody?
Well, I just want to put in a praise for Ambassador Blake, because I felt like if he hadn't been willing to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and put himself into positions there where he didn't have to do what he did, and he went to a lot of meetings and participated in a lot of this process, that helped our kids. It helped the school, and initially helped that one teacher who was kind of, they set their eyes on her, but they didn't stay very long. And I just respect Ambassador Blake for his work on that, because it made a huge difference. And he was incredibly accessible to everybody with the town halls, and he really wanted the truth to be told. And we all wanted the truth to be told. We all wanted the truth to be told. He was really grand. He was just, the best.
Oh, that's very nice. I'm not sure. That's probably an exaggeration, but I will say, I think that the lesson from that is, first of all, to stand up for the truth, to stand up again for evidence-based decision-making. And, I think that's what we in the United States have always been known for. And so I think people admired us for that stand and that principle. And, if I had to do the whole thing all over again, I'd do exactly the same thing. And I would just, hope for a better outcome in the legal system. And again, I think if we'd had a little bit more support from some of our other, some of the other countries who were represented on the board, we might have had a different outcome. But very few were willing to stand up and face criticism in the press and, try to say that we were interfering in their domestic affairs and, the usual accusations that one gets in these kinds of things. And the other thing that I think Lainie said, which is absolutely right, is communication is absolutely essential. So we had regular town halls where I would go to the school and after hours, and the parents and the teachers and anybody else who wanted to join could come, and myself and the principal spoke for usually an hour or so and took questions. And I think that was very reassuring to people, because they saw that we were willing to be held to account for what we were doing. And we're very open to questions and any comments or suggestions. And So I think that was also reassuring. So communication is also a really important part of a good outcome or in such cases.
So I guess my last question, Bob and Lainie, did the school survive all of this? I mean, I know the teachers and the janitors were held and went to prison and that sort of thing. Is the school still there and working? And is that part of it, at least a positive outcome?
Oh, absolutely. The school is doing fine. As Lainie said, they had to change their name slightly. They went from being the Jakarta International School to the Jakarta Intercultural School to comply with Indonesian regulations, but that was fine. That wasn't a big deal. And it remains probably the top educational institution for foreign kids, the kids of business people and diplomats and others. And I will say about a quarter or so of the student population are also Indonesian. Yeah. Because many, for example, Indonesian diplomats had their kids in, let's say, American schools, and it was hard for them to then go back into the Indonesian system. So they had the option to enter the Jakarta Intercultural School if they wanted and finish their education there. And so the sons and daughters of many prominent Indonesians were also there at GIST.
That's
and
right.
They also were extremely supportive of what we were trying to do. And in fact, were quite helpful behind the scenes, kind of pushing their own buttons to try to get this resolved in a satisfactory way. So this wasn't just the foreigners versus Indonesia. There were a lot of Indonesians who were working hard behind the scenes, which I think was helpful as well.
Definitely.
Well, I think we can all say that that transparency and sunlight in this respect really did help. Unfortunately, it didn't help the two teachers, and particularly the Canadian who spent the most time in jail. But
no, actually, he didn't spend the most time. The Indonesian spent the most time, and I have really good news. Last weekend, he was released.
Oh my God! After how many years?
He's out of jail.
How many years?
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's great news.
Yes. I'm so happy to share it. His name's Ferdy, and he was there for 5 years, or is it's 5 years to the day he went into jail, he was released.
Wow. Is this something Indonesians just think can happen to them? Like you can end up in jail?
Yes.
Really?
Golly.
Yeah.
Oh.
Mm.
Yeah, there was a lot of this kind of what I would call almost extortion where, and it happened more to companies than it did to obviously schools like, to institutions like our school. But, it was a way that sometimes unscrupulous Indonesian businesses would try to put their American counterparts out of business by inventing some frivolous lawsuit and threatening, millions of dollars in fines. And the companies would either be forced to pay the money or to go through a similar kind of situation where, they had to face a very uncertain outcome. Generally, they tried to fight it, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they just exercised the easy way out and just paid the money and got rid of the case. So unfortunately, this is sort of a tried and true method of getting money out of people, and so I think that's why you have these kinds of things. But that's why it's also so important to stand up and not give in and stand up for the truth. I don't know if you've had a separate conversation about the role of the close, but if I could just briefly mention my own perspective as an ambassador.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of our listeners, maybe people who don't know a lot about how an embassy operates, in a big place like Jakarta, we have hundreds of American staff, and many of them were on their first tours overseas, and didn't have a lot of experience living overseas, and so for them and for us as post managers, the close were just absolutely essential parts of what we call our country team. And, for example, they helped to ensure the smooth arrivals for all new employees, made sure that there was an American who was out there to meet the new arrivals and their families, made sure that there was food in the refrigerator when they arrived at their apartment or their house. They provided information about recreational and cultural and job opportunities for people. And, for me, they advised me and the DCM about, about the community, about quality of life, and, what people were saying. Oftentimes, for me, they were absolutely essential feedback mechanism, and, let me know if there were, issues in the community like this school problem where something was not going right. And, this is Ambassador, this is really something you should pay attention to and do something about. So the clothes are to my mind, sort of unsung heroes and people who really do an incredible job and often don't get the recognition they deserve.
Well, thank you for that. And Lainie, you were thrown into this.
Oh, God.
You were thrown into
Yes.
the deep end of the pool right away
Oh, my
without much training or experience.
Literally.
Yeah.
The whole thing blew up like 2 weeks before I took the office. So it was, I remember me and my co-clo were both new, and we went through that whole summer with all this chaos. And then we went to clo training in about October. So that's when we finally got a little bit more like formal guidance on how to handle these things.
At this point, you could have probably taught the course.
Absolutely.
I will say that we were given a lot of time to talk about that experience and sort of decompress during the clo training. So it was good.
Well, Lainie,
But
Bob,
that's a very
go ahead.
tried and true part of the Foreign Service. Is we all learn on the job, and we were very fortunate to have Lainie there who handled herself in a very professional manner.
In
So
fact,
nice.
there's a group out there called 25YA. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's 20 YA means 25 years apprenticeship, which means that our average career is 25 years as Foreign Service officers or Foreign Service personnel, and that we're learning all along the way from others who have been there before us. And
Very much so.
there is probably no better way to describe not only how we learn, but the exciting part about how we learn in the career that we've chosen. And so both of you, thanks so much for this. Laura, do you have anything else you'd like to say and take us out with some music?
I do want to thank you both because you were two totally different and totally essential, important parts of what turned out to be a very important event at the embassy. And so thank you both for your wonderful service.
Just a little note to our listeners that if you get tired of cleaning doorknobs and scouring sinks and putting on masks, and as I do, check in with the spice cabinet a couple of times a day just to make sure I still have my sense of smell.
If you need a break from your homeschooling.
From homeschooling, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk to you in a week.
Like Cali in the jungle.